Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, February 3rd, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about a 2024 presidential election prediction between Vice President Kamala Harris and former Vice President Mike Pence. Now, this would be the ultimate race, the ultimate clash between two vice presidents, Mike Pence, of course, serving under President Donald Trump, and Vice President Kamala Harris being the current Vice President of the United States. This is something that many people speculate would happen, considering both of them are top political figures in a party that might move on the need for Joe Biden, and the Republican Party, which might move on from the need of Donald Trump. Now, Mike Pence definitely would be a shoo-in in 2024 if he chooses to run for office. Now, he has definitely pushed away some voters on the Trump side from supporting him wholeheartedly in the primary, but I can guarantee he'd start out with a very large amount of support, given that he was the vice president under a pretty popular president amongst Republicans. Kamala Harris would just be the incumbent vice president, and it's very easy to see the vice president to presidential nominee pipeline, and she would be no different, right? So looking at this 2024 map, we have an entirely different electoral map. A number of states have changed. Check out your own home state. Chances are that it's possible they could have changed. I mean, there are a number of state shifts in terms of the amount of electoral votes state by state. A lot of states did remain the same. However, I mean, my state did stay the same with plenty of others, but there are certain states that have shifted in terms of the amount of electoral votes that they have. California, for the first time, actually losing electoral representation in decades. I mean, California had always been on the up, and now it seems to be at a point where it's losing electoral votes at the expense of other states, even though it is increasing in population. So let's go ahead and take a look at the safe states. I mean, it's the same standard type of electoral map. There isn't too many surprises on this map. You're not going to see a super significant shift in certain states. You will see much closer states. That is very possible. But also, what matters is the margins, right? So if you're not seeing a state that you would expect to flip or that could flip, not flipping, I mean, this is a very early prediction. We are 3 years away, and I actually made 2020 presidential election predictions back in 2017, which is exactly why I'm making this video. This is just to reflect. This is by no means going to be the most accurate prediction on my channel. This is just a way for me to put a benchmark as to how the electoral map evolved from the beginning of 2021 through the end of 2024, because it's very important to see how candidates pretty much rewrote the electoral map, because Donald Trump in 2016, rewrote the electoral map. Had we made an election prediction in 2013, the Rust Belt likely would have been possibly safe blue, depending on who the potential nominees were going to be. Had you told anyone then that it was going to be Donald Trump, you would have characterized it as safe blue. So this is just a way for us to see how the states have changed over time. Some of these states I'm going to change from safe right now. We're just going to work with all the states that we normally characterize as safe, and then we're going to actually move into the true margins about them. So when you see Alaska and South Carolina as safe, don't be alarmed. That's just for right now. These are the states that are going to be very solid for certain political parties. So as we go through, I'm sure that this is the last one: Virginia, New Mexico, Colorado. That's pretty much it for the states that I consider to be, they're not going to end up being safe. We're going to move them over into the likely column, and we'll talk about why I think they will be, likely, even though, Joe Biden won them by pretty large amounts in 2020. So overall, we have 124 electoral votes for Mike Pence and Josh Hawley. That is just my guess type of scenario for a potential vice presidential nominee. For Kamala Harris, it could be Pete Buttigieg. She really likes him. It could be Julian Castro. We don't know. I'm just saying for right now, I'm going to put a placeholder type of Democratic name, someone who could be it, but I'm by no means making a prediction this far out. But looking at the amount of electoral votes, I mean, both parties start out with a relatively same electoral map that they're used to. Now in 2020, I would not have already characterized Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia as pretty much safe states, but I'm very secure as to how I think that these states are going to go. Same thing with Maine at large. While I'm going to move them down into the likely column, I still think they're going to be double-digit margins for Kamala Harris, regardless. So looking at her being at the top of the ticket, I think she could tap into the same type of base that Joe Biden did. On top of that, these states are increasing in terms of minority population. Specifically, Latino voters across all three of these states are increasing in terms of their vote share. So looking at them, I expect them to vote more so for Kamala Harris than they did for Joe Biden. Donald Trump was just a very spectacular candidate compared to previous Republicans in terms of his performance. I mean, he did much better than Mitt Romney, much better than George Bush, much better than John McCain. And looking at his loss, in his re-election bid, he still lost, but he only lost by 1%. And that's something that doesn't typically happen, where just 1% could have fundamentally shifted the way this country went. And Donald Trump was an anomaly. He was someone that nobody really expected to win in 2016. Everyone was shocked to see the 306 to 232 map. People were also shocked to see a 306 to 232 map, but also for different reasons. They expected Donald Trump to lose in 2016. People expected him to lose by a larger amount in 2020. But that obviously did not end up happening. While Joe Biden did win the election, he still was within 1% of losing. Donald Trump could have won the election had he done just a little bit better in certain battleground states. But also, Donald Trump did much better amongst minority voters than Joe Biden was expected to do relative to Hillary Clinton. If you look at the shift from 2016, especially in some of these states, Florida, perfect example. Miami-Dade County, Clinton won it by 30 points. Joe Biden only won it by 6. From 30 to 6, that is a super significant shift in favor of the GOP. 22 points more Republican than it was. And why am I mentioning this county? Well, it had nearly 1 million votes. The entire state of Florida had roughly 10 million votes. So looking at this one county, shifting 22 points more to the GOP is super significant. In fact, despite the higher turnout nationwide, Joe Biden received less votes than Hillary Clinton did in this county, and Donald Trump received 200,000 more. Donald Trump did very well in terms of shifting people across the RGV in the state of Texas. Huge shift to the right. We're talking 55 points more Republican, 40 points more Republican, 38 points more Republican. It was not because Republicans had tapped into these voting bases more than Democrats were able to. It was more so that Donald Trump was the person to do it. I don't see that in Mike Pence. I think that minority voters are going to revert back to the same place they were before, the same way I expect some suburban voters to revert back to the Republican Party, because it's down to, Mike Pence, Josh Hawley, much more, I guess, less outspoken conservative names. Maybe you wouldn't argue that for Josh Hawley, but I will say that they definitely are more tempered than Donald Trump, and definitely aren't viewed as the same way that suburban voters viewed Donald Trump, which is exactly why they didn't vote for him, despite voting for Republicans in years past. So for those Republican states that I would consider to be likely, we're talking about South Carolina, we're talking about Alaska, Kansas. For right now, I would just say these are the states that I would characterize as immediately likely states for the GOP. And of course, we have the likely Democratic states. So let's move on. Let's move on into some of these more, battleground-esque type states that I think that Mike Pence could win by a lean, possibly likely margin. I think that Iowa and Ohio will still go to the GOP. I think that the residual support here for Mike Pence from Donald Trump will still be enough. I don't think he will have nearly as large of victories as Donald Trump did in the state of Ohio, in the state of Iowa. These are two states that had voted for Obama. Obama won Iowa by 10 in 2008. He won Ohio by 4 or 5. So looking at the margin of victory, 8 years later, Donald Trump ended up winning it in 2016, Iowa by nearly 10, and Ohio by 8. So the margin of victory for Donald Trump in these states were very substantial. I think while it will narrow down, I think Mike Pence will still have enough support to hold on to both of these battleground states. Kamala Harris, I think, will win Nevada. I think she will have a pretty okay victory there. I think Arizona will also be another lean Democratic state. The problem with the Republican Party in Georgia and Arizona is these are not the states such as North Carolina. It was not an anomaly that they voted for the Democratic Party. The election was close. And they still went to the Democrats. The point being, if it was a blowout, these would have been lean, possibly likely states for the Democratic Party. But it was not a blowout. It was a margin of victory by 1 point that put Joe Biden over the top across the battleground states. Joe Biden won the battleground states by 0.03%. If you combine all of them, he won them by 0.03%. It was by no means a blowout, yet Arizona and Georgia still went to the Democratic Party. And the population growth within the Phoenix area, within the Atlanta area, will be enough, I think, to carry Kamala Harris to a victory by a lean margin in both Arizona and Georgia. I think both of these states will be pretty secure for the Democratic Party entering into 2024. It will be on the Republicans to win it back. So looking at the 147 remaining toss-up electoral votes, I think there is still enough support for Kamala Harris to do well in Nebraska's 2nd district. While she won't perform as well amongst suburban voters, which is a huge demographic group in this district, I also think that Mike Pence won't be that figure that can win them back. Mitt Romney won this district by 7. Donald Trump won it by 2 and then lost it by 7. It's been a pretty significant shift since the last time Joe Biden was on the ballot prior to the 2020 election, a 14-point shift to be exact. I think there will be enough support for Kamala Harris to narrowly win this district, and also definitely has taken a turn away from extreme conservatism. You see, Mike Pence, Mike Pence, but Mike Pence I wouldn't say exactly is Mitt Romney. While they definitely do have similar approaches to making conservatism seem normal compared to Donald Trump, who definitely was much more boisterous with his campaign tactics and the way that he debated, I still think that there was definitely a shift away from support for anyone who was tied to the Trump administration in certain regions of the country because of their close association with him, and I think Nebraska's 2nd District is exactly one of those areas that we could see that happen. But also, like I had mentioned in other states, the residual support for Donald Trump will pour over, I think, for Mike Pence, enough that he could win in Maine's 2nd District by a lean margin. I don't think it's going to flip back to the Democratic Party, but in neighboring New Hampshire, I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if it returned to being a close state, and I expect Kamala Harris to win. I mean, New Hampshire was called practically immediately. Joe Biden won the state by 7.3%. Had a regular candidate won a state such as New Hampshire by 7.3%, you probably would have expected the election to be called that evening. You would have expected them to dominate in the Rust Belt. New Hampshire had always been closer than the Rust Belt. Vote-wise, in 2016, it was closer than the Rust Belt, but it wasn't necessarily by overall percentage. But looking at the results in New Hampshire, if this was any other type of normal election, I think that we would have known who won already. But since Donald Trump was such a particular candidate, he lost in certain regions of the country overwhelmingly, but made up for it in other regions. So it was a very interesting election. 2020 did not match any of the trends that we had seen in the past. 2016 did, however, match the trends. A region of the country shifting away, a region of the South getting more Democratic. Looking at 2020, however, we saw the southern region get more Democratic. We saw this area shift very little, but no shift in Iowa and Ohio, practically no shift whatsoever. New Hampshire shifted to the left. Colorado shifted to the left. Nevada, though, shifted to the right. Florida, though, shifted to the right. So a very interesting election. Florida went red, but Georgia went blue. Had I told you that in 2016, you would have called me crazy. Had anyone told me that, I would have called them crazy because that just seemed very unrealistic, but that's how our American electorate is. Very, very strange. Mike Pence, I think, will do well in states such as Texas. I think that he will still be able to win it. While the state is going to get increasingly more diverse and in turn increasingly more pro-democratic, for right now, I still think the GOP has a pretty strong grip on the state. I understand Julian Castro is from that state, but I'm not going to discount the conservative presence in this state because without Donald Trump, on the ballot, Republicans do tend to do better sometimes. Even though 2018 Beto O'Rourke did very, very well, I would say that he was someone who reminded me a lot of Barack Obama. He reminded me a lot of a very good speaker, someone who's able to resonate very well with the American public, with the people in Texas. He went from someone who was just a congressman from Texas, to being third, fourth place in the 2020 Democratic primary polling. So it was a very interesting campaign for Beto O'Rourke to run for president. But looking at Texas, I think that it is in reach for Democrats, but I don't think they are the immediate favorites to win in 2024. I think Mike Pence will still be able to tap into those Romney-McCain voters that voted for them by much larger margins than they did for Donald Trump both times. But I do think it's going to get narrower than it was in 2020, but just enough that the Republicans can hold on to it. As for the Rust Belt, I expect Kamala Harris to do well here. I think she will win them. I think that she'll still, be able to do well in Wisconsin, win Pennsylvania. I think she will win Michigan. These states are going to get very, very close. I think, Mike Pence will have the ability to win over back of those suburban voters, but I do not expect Mike Pence to perform as well as Donald Trump amongst minority voters. The problem is Donald Trump was this candidate who was told to voters, to minority voters specifically, that if he wins, this is the end. If Donald Trump wins in 2016, this is the end for minority livelihoods, right? And looking at what happened was, while he did implement fundamental change in terms of immigration tactics, in terms of, tried to implement new versions of healthcare, trying to do things for the Republican House and Republican Senate, I would say the Democrats cried wolf. You see, while they did treat Donald Trump as one of the biggest threats to America, I think doing that in 2016 and then he won, and then for some of these minority voters, their lives did not change super significantly. I mean, there's not one president who would have a super large impact, enough that's extremely noticeable that someone's life would be much worse than it was before. And I think, when that happens, that's when those presidents get voted out by landslides. But due to a number of issues, I would say Donald Trump was able to spin that into blaming it on the pandemic, into blaming it on Democratic governors for lockdown orders. And I think a lot of the reason why Donald Trump was able to win over more voters is because the Democratic Party told minority voters in 2016, this is it. If Donald Trump wins, it's over for minorities in America. They labeled him as a racist. They used his words against him. And, the attack ads were constant. And not to say they didn't do that in 2020, but the focus was definitely more on COVID-19 and racial inequality rather than, just talking about his comments. And, I actually think Hillary Clinton was a very good candidate for minority voters. Back in 2016, we saw some regions of the country where black voters voted for Clinton more than they did for Obama. They loved her. Minority voters loved Hillary Clinton, just not enough that they were able to turn out in the same numbers that 2020 experienced. And white working class voters did not like her. They didn't trust her. That was very evident in the exit polling data that they said she was not a trustworthy candidate. They didn't want to vote someone who was not trustworthy. I think Kamala Harris will do well. I think she will return the Rust Belt to its previous, super competitive status. Without Donald Trump on the ballot, the Democrats will likely remain the favorites in the Rust Belt. I think that as time goes on, the Republican presence will increase and the Democrats will still have to fight for it. But Mike Pence is so unenthusiastic. I mean, he's not comparable to Donald Trump. He will not perform as well as Donald Trump. He went to campaign in Georgia, and what type of crowds did he pull? Nowhere near Donald Trump. No Republican can ever compare to Donald Trump's grip on the American people, on his voters, especially in the Rust Belt. When he visited it in 2016, the Clinton campaign wrote it off. They said, why is he coming for safe states? Why does he think he can contest Wisconsin? Why does he think he can contest Michigan? We just held the DNC in Pennsylvania. Does Trump really think it's in play? And he did. I mean, he still visited other states. He went to hold a campaign rally in Connecticut. He asked them to flip the state. We knew that wasn't going to happen. But the Rust Belt seemed to be just as far out of reach. Obama had just won Michigan by 10 points 4 years prior to 2016. Donald Trump made these races competitive, but because he was a Republican that they had not seen in the past. These three states had voted with the Democratic Party for 24 or 28 years straight, depending on the state. Nearly 3 decades voting with the Democratic Party. And Donald Trump comes around with an inspiring, rally, with an inspiring speech, whatever it might be, because of his energy, because of his, as many people, he's a billionaire, but he was still down to earth. I would say Donald Trump definitely had a personal type of campaign tactic. He did not seem like the average politician. If anyone was an outsider, it was Donald Trump in the 2016 election, especially not Hillary Clinton. So looking at his rally performances, I do not expect that from Mike Pence. I don't expect this type of appeal. Mike Pence can't argue that he's an outsider. He was a governor from Indiana. He had worked in Indiana state politics. He became the vice president to President Trump. The only type of thing that I think could carry him across the finish line if he was to even get there, because as you can see, I am projecting Kamala Harris to win the election, would be through Donald Trump's coattails, would be through Donald Trump's residual support in some of these states. But without it, he's nothing. Without Donald Trump, Mike Pence is nothing. As a candidate on his own, he'd probably get 1, 2, 3% in the polling data. They tried a quietly tempered Republican candidate. That was Ben Carson. That was Ted Cruz. That was John Kasich. Could any of them overcome Donald Trump? No. And Mike Pence has that combined. He has the temper, I guess, the temperament of a traditional type of Carson, Cruz, Kasich, Rubio. Maybe not Rubio, but definitely the more traditional type of Republican. But the support of President Trump. But the problem still remains: his close association with President Trump will still move voters away. Mike Pence wouldn't make it through a primary without Trump, but he also wouldn't make it through a general election with Trump. And that's the problem for him. While Trump can land him a victory in the primary, if he wants to, Trump could run himself, his close association with him likely would lose him the general election. And don't even get me started on the type of turnout that we would see for Kamala Harris or Julian Castro together. I would say they would be very strong in terms of minority turnout. But also they do need to acknowledge that they likely will lose white support relative to 2020. But if they can turn out minority voters the same way that we saw in Georgia, the same way we saw in Arizona, the Democrats may be at a point where they could carry both of those states and North Carolina in 2024. I think Mike Pence will just have enough to carry the 31 electoral votes in Florida, but Mike Pence is not Donald Trump. He will not win Latino voters the same way that Donald Trump could have. Donald Trump is the only Republican who performs super well in Florida. Through the Sun Belt, George Bush maxed it out in 2004. Since then, the Republican Party hasn't exactly had too much hope. I understand Democrats have lost statewide elections in Florida, but by tilt margins. Florida governor decided by less than half a percentage point. Florida Senate decided by 0.2%. These were not blowout victories for the GOP. They have gotten lucky time and time again. And I don't want to hear it about 2018 being a Democratic wave year. This state is immune to wave years. Look at 2014. Look at the governor election in 2014. Very close despite it being a Republican wave year. Florida and a couple of other states are immune to wave years. They still vote super close, and they do skew to the GOP. I'm not going to deny that, which is why I think Mike Pence can still win Florida's 31 electoral votes in this scenario. But also, one should point out, it's not completely out of reach, and Mike Pence will not perform nearly as well as Donald Trump in some of these states. Iowa, Ohio have gotten closer. Texas, Florida have gotten closer. Wisconsin, Pennsylvania have gotten closer for Kamala Harris. I would say, Minnesota has as well. New Hampshire has as well. So to revert back to our traditional type of electoral map, we'll still see some of the similar swing states swinging back and forth. But the Democrats, I think for right now, if it's a race that comes down between Kamala Harris and Mike Pence, Kamala Harris would win the election with 318 electoral votes to Mike Pence's 220. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.